I was born to be sacrificed to the river. When I tried to escape, the flood came for everyone. My lover held me in a tree above the rising water and said, "Love cannot be traded for fear." Then he made a choice that stopped the storm instantly.
The night Nkem was born, the Umuoma River broke its banks. It came without warning, no storm clouds, no thunder, just the sudden, furious rush of water swallowing the lower village whole. Huts collapsed like paper, goats bleated in the dark, men shouted for their children, women clutched infants to their chests and ran toward higher ground, their wrappers soaked and heavy. Sanara had been in labour for 2 days. She lay in her mother's hut at the edge of the village, too weak to flee, too far gone to care. The midwife had already whispered the baby would not come. But when the floodwater reached the threshold, cold, black, unstoppable, Sanara screamed one final time, and Nkem was born into water. The midwife caught her just as the river poured through the doorway. For a moment, the baby did not cry. She floated in the midwife's trembling hands, eyes wide and black as river stones, silent as the deep. Then she gasped. The water receded. By dawn, the Umuoma had returned to its bed as if nothing had happened. But 12 huts were gone, 3 elders were dead, and in Sanara's arms lay a baby girl with a mark on her wrist, a swirl of dark pigment shaped like rippling water. The elders came at sunrise. Orin, the eldest among them, bent low to examine the child. His face was lined like dried riverbeds, his eyes sharp and unforgiving. He touched the mark with one gnarled finger. "She belongs to the river," he said quietly. Sanara pulled her daughter closer. "She is mine." "She was spared," Orin continued, ignoring her. "The Umuoma took 3 of our own and left this one breathing. That is not mercy. And that is claim," the other elders murmured in agreement.
"Oh, my
"She
sweet
is
baby.
blessed,"
You
one
are
whispered.
so precious.
"She
I
is
will always
marked,"
protect you.
another corrected. Sanara looked down at her daughter, so small, so perfect. Her tiny fingers curled against her chest. The mark on her wrist seemed to shimmer in the morning light. "What does it mean?" Sanara's voice cracked. Orin straightened slowly. "It means the river has named her, and when it calls, she must answer." Nkem grew up beneath the weight of whispers. The other children would not play with her. Their mothers pulled them away when she approached, their eyes full of pity and fear. At the market, women touched her head as she passed and muttered blessings under their breath. The fisherman never met her gaze. She learned early that she was not like the others. By the time she turned 16, she had stopped asking why. And it was the dry season when Orin summoned her to the sacred grove. The Umuoma had shrunk to a slow, glittering thread beneath the sun. The air smelled of dust and roasting yams. Nkem walked barefoot through the village, past women pounding cassava, past men mending nets, past children who fell silent as she passed. Her mother followed at a distance, her wrapper pulled tight around her shoulders. The grove was cool and shadowed, thick with ancient trees whose roots drank from the river. Orin sat on a carved stool, his staff resting across his knees. The other elders formed a half-circle behind him. "Sit, child," Orin said. Nkem sat on the earth. Her mother remained standing, just outside the circle. Orin's voice was steady, ceremonial. "You are 16 harvests old. The time has come for you to know your purpose." Nkem's heart began to beat faster. She had always known this day would come. The mark on her wrist seemed to burn. "Before you were born," Orin continued, "the Umuoma was angry. For 3 generations the river gave us fish, gave us water, gave us life. But we grew careless. We forgot to honor what sustains us. The river warned us with drought. We did not listen. It warned us with floods. Still, we did not hear." He paused, letting the weight of history settle. "And then it took what it was owed." Sanara made a small sound, half breath, half sob. "The Umuoma does not take without reason," Orin said, "and it does not give without purpose. You were born in its water. You carry its mark. You are the covenant between our people and the river. Nkem's voice came out small. Ing, what does that mean? It means, Orin said slowly, that when the river calls for you, you must go. You must be offered to the Umuoma, return to the water that spared you. Only then will the balance be restored. Only then will our people be free from the river's claim. The world seemed to tilt. Nkem stared at the old man, trying to make sense of his words. Offered. The word sat in her chest like a stone. You mean, I am to die? You are to be given, Orin corrected. There is a difference. When? Her voice barely rose above a whisper. When the signs appear, when the river grows dark at dusk, when the fish turn belly up in still water, when the wells run dry though rain has fallen. He leaned forward. Then you will know, the Umuoma is calling you home. Sonara stepped into the circle then, her face wet with tears. She is my daughter, my only child. She was never yours to keep, Orin said, not unkindly. She was always the river's. That night, Sonara held Nkem in the darkness of their hut and prayed to every god she knew. She prayed to the ancestors. She prayed to the sky. She prayed to the earth beneath her knees. But she did not pray to the river. She would not give her daughter to the water, not while breath still moved through her body. Sometimes heaven allows a child to be born, so that an entire people might remember what they have forgotten. Kale first saw her by the riverbank at dawn. He had risen early to check his traps, the mist still thick over the Umuoma, the world quiet except for the soft rush of water over stone. He moved through the reeds with practiced silence, his net slung over one shoulder, his feet sure on the muddy path. And then he saw her. She stood at the water's edge, her wrapper tied beneath her arms, her hair loose and wild. She was not washing clothes or fetching water. She was simply standing, staring into the current as if waiting for it to speak. Kyle stopped. He had seen her before, of course. Everyone in Amailu knew who she was, the girl with the mark, the one promised to the river. But he had never been this close, had never noticed the curve of her shoulders or the way the morning light caught in her eyes. She turned suddenly, sensing him. I'm sorry, Kyle said quickly, raising one hand. I didn't mean to disturb you. Nkem studied him. He was tall, lean, his skin dark and smooth. A fisherman, from the look of his hands. Not one of the elders' sons, not one of the important men. You didn't, she said finally. He smiled, small, tentative. I'm Kyle. I know who you are. And I know who you are. They stood in silence for a moment, the river moving between them. You're not afraid of me, Nkem said. It was not a question. Should I be? Most people are. Kyle shook his head. You're just a girl standing by a river. Something shifted in her chest, light, unexpected. No one had ever spoken to her like that, as if she were ordinary, as if she were free. Just a girl, she repeated softly. Unless you're secretly a river spirit, Kyle added, grinning, in which case I apologize for my rudeness. Nkem laughed, a real laugh, bright and startled. She couldn't remember the last time she had laughed. Kale's grin widened. There, that's better. They began meeting at dawn. At first it was accidental, Kyle checking his traps, Nkem walking along the bank. But soon it became deliberate. She would wake before the village stirred and slip out into the cool morning air. He would be waiting by the bend in the river, his net already emptied, his eyes warm. They talked about small things at first, the weather, the fish, the way the baobab tree near the market had split in half during the last storm. But slowly, carefully, they began to talk about real things. Kyle told her about his mother, who had died when he was young, about his father, who drank too much palm wine and forgot to come home, about his dream of building a proper house one day, with walls thick enough to keep out the rain. Inkem told him about the loneliness, about growing up untouchable, about the way people looked at her like she was already gone. "I'm still here," she whispered one morning, her voice tight. I'm still alive." Kyle reached out and took her hand. It was the first time anyone had touched her without fear. Her breath caught. His palm was rough, calloused from work, warm against her skin. He did not let go. "You're real," he said quietly. "You're not a prophecy. You're not a symbol. You're Unkem, and you're here, with me." She looked down at their joined hands, at the mark on her wrist, dark against her skin, at his fingers, strong and sure. "I don't want to leave," she whispered. "Then don't." "It's not that simple." "Why not?" She met his eyes. "Because the river doesn't let go of what it claims." Kyle's jaw tightened. "Then we'll make it let go." The love grew quiet and fierce, hidden in the spaces between dawn and daylight. They met in secret. They spoke in whispers. And slowly, impossibly, Unkem began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could belong to someone other than the water. But the river, patient and ancient, was already beginning to stir. It started with the fish. Old Adana found them first, dozens of them, floating belly up in the shallows near her washing stones. Their eyes were clouded, their gills still. The water around them was clear, unstained, but the fish were dead. By midday, more appeared. The fishermen pulled in their nets and found them full of corpses. The children who played in the river shallows came running back to the village, crying, their hands stinking of rot. Orin came to the riverbank and stood in silence for a long time. "Burn them," he said finally, "all of them." The men built pyres along the shore. The smell of burning fish hung over Amelu for 3 days. Then the wells began to fail. One by one, the village wells, deep wells, wells that had given water for generations, ran dry. Women lowered their buckets and pulled up nothing but mud and stones. Even the well near the sacred grove, which had never failed, not even in the worst droughts gave only a trickle, and yet the Umuoma still flowed. The elders gathered in the grove, the people gathered in the market square, their voices rising in fear and confusion. "It is the river," someone said. "It is the girl," another whispered. Nkem heard the whispers. She saw the way people looked at her now, not with pity, but with accusation. She had always been marked, but now she was blamed. Her mother kept her inside after sunset. "Do not go to the river," Sanara pleaded. "Do not give them reason to speak your name." But Nkem could feel it, the pull, the restlessness. And the mark on her wrist burned at night, hot and insistent. Kyle came to her window after dark. "Come away with me," he whispered through the woven palm walls. "We can leave, tonight, before they come for you." Where would we go? Anywhere, the next village, the city, it doesn't matter. They will find me. Let them try. Nkem closed her eyes. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe they could outrun a river, outrun a prophecy, outrun the weight of 16 years. But that night, as she lay on her mat, she heard it, the sound of water, not the gentle rush of the Umuoma in its bed. This was different, closer, deeper, like a voice calling from beneath the earth. She rose and went to the door. The village was silent, the moon hung low and full. And there, in the centre of the square, where there had been only dry dirt that morning, a pool of water, dark, still, reflecting nothing. Nkem's heart hammered in her chest. She stepped closer. The water did not ripple, did not move. It simply waited. And then, from somewhere far away, or perhaps very close, she heard it. A whisper, her name, Nkem. She stumbled backward, her breath coming fast. The river was calling. When destiny calls, disobedience does not bring freedom. It brings the storm that forces the choice. Kale came for her 3 nights later. The air was thick and heavy, the sky swollen with clouds that would not break. The village had grown tense, fearful. Mothers kept their children inside. The fishermen refused to cast their nets. Even the elders had stopped gathering in the grove, as if afraid to invoke what was already stirring. Nkem had not slept, and the water in the square had not disappeared. It had grown, spreading slowly, inch by inch, until it lapped at the edges of the nearest huts. No one touched it. No one dared. Her mother prayed constantly now, her voice hoarse, her eyes red. "Mama," Nkem whispered one evening, "what if I just went? What if I gave myself to the river and ended this?" Sonara grabbed her daughter's face in both hands, fierce and desperate. "You will do no such thing. You are my child, mine, not the river's, not the elders', mine." But Nkem could see the fear in her mother's eyes, the knowing. That night, Kale threw a pebble at her window. She slipped out into the darkness, her heart pounding. He was waiting in the shadow of the baobab tree, a woven sack slung over his shoulder. "We leave now," he said. No greeting, no hesitation. "Kyle, I have food, water, enough to get us to the next village. After that, we keep moving." "They will come after us." "I don't care." The river is water, Nkem, just water. It can't follow us beyond its banks." She looked at him, this man who loved her like she was ordinary, like she was worth saving. His jaw was set, his eyes burning with determination. "I can't ask you to do this," she whispered. "You're not asking, I'm choosing." For a long moment they stood in the darkness, the weight of the decision hanging between them. Then Nkem reached down and touched the mark on her wrist. It was hot, pulsing like a second heartbeat. Slowly, carefully, she untied the thin bracelet her mother had woven for her when she was small, the only thing she had ever worn to cover the mark. She let it fall to the ground. "Let's go," she said. They ran. Through the village, past the sleeping huts, past the sacred grove, toward the northern path that led into the forest. Kyle's hand was strong around hers, pulling her forward. The night air rushed past them. For a moment, one brief, wild moment, Nkem felt free. And then the thunder came, not from the sky, from the river. A sound like the world splitting open, deep, ancient, furious. The ground beneath their feet trembled. Birds erupted from the trees in a shrieking cloud. Dogs began to howl. Nkem and Kale stumbled to a stop. Behind them, rising into the night sky, was a wall of water. The Umuoma had broken free. The flood came like vengeance. It roared through Wamailu with the force of a living thing, hungry, relentless, swallowing everything in its path. Huts collapsed with wet, splintering cracks. Goats screamed. Children were snatched from their mothers' arms by the current. The sacred grove, untouched for generations, disappeared beneath churning black water. Kyle pulled Nkem toward higher ground, his arm locked around her waist. The water chased them, rising faster than they could run. It licked at their heels, cold and grasping. "Climb!" Kyle shouted, shoving her toward the baobab tree. She scrambled up, her hands tearing on the bark, her breath ragged. Kyle followed. They clung to the branches as the water surged beneath them, swirling with debris, pieces of homes, broken pots, a child's doll spinning in the foam. Below, the village was drowning. Nkem could hear the screams, could see figures struggling in the water, arms reaching toward the sky. Her mother, the elders, the children who had once run from her. "No," she gasped. "No, no. I know. Hold on." Kyle's voice was tight with fear, but the water kept rising, and then cutting through the chaos came Orin's voice, thin, commanding, desperate. "Return what belongs to the river." He stood on the roof of his hut, the water lapping at his knees, his staff raised high. The other elders who had survived clung to whatever they could find, their faces pale with terror. "She has refused her calling," Orin shouted to the drowning village, to the furious river, to the indifferent sky. "The covenant is broken. Return her and the river will be appeased." Nkem felt the words like blows. This was her fault, her refusal, her love, her selfish, foolish hope for a life that was never hers to claim. She looked down at the water, at the bodies floating in the darkness, at her mother's hut, already half submerged. "And I have to go," she whispered. "No." Kyle's voice was sharp. "No, this isn't your fault. They're dying because of me. They're dying because of fear and superstition, eh? They're dying because I ran." Her voice broke. "I was marked, I was chosen, and I tried to escape." The tree shuddered beneath them. The water rose another foot. Kyle gripped her tighter. "If you go to that river, you die, Nkem. Do you understand? You don't get returned. You don't get honored. You drown." "And if I don't?" She turned to face him, tears streaming down her face. "How many more will the river take?" He had no answer. Below them, a woman's scream was cut short by the water. Nkem closed her eyes. She thought of her mother. She thought of the children. She thought of every person in Amailu who had ever whispered her name with fear. Yes, but also with the desperate hope that she would save them. She had always known this day would come. "I love you," she whispered to Kyle. "Nkem, please. I love you, and that's why I have to do this." She began to climb down. Kyle caught her arm, nearly pulling her from the branch. "No," he said again, his voice raw. "I won't let you." The water swirled below them, dark and patient. "Let me go," Nkem said softly. "Never." She looked at him, really looked at him. At the man who had seen her as human, who had touched her without fear, who had loved her like she was worth more than a prophecy. "You gave me something no one else ever did," she said, her voice steady despite the tears. "You gave me a choice. You made me believe I could be more than what they said I was. You are more, but I'm also this." She held up her wrist, the mark stark against her skin. "I've been running from it my whole life. Maybe it's time to stop." Thunder rumbled. Not from the sky, from the river, a warning, a demand. "Then we go together," Kale said suddenly, fiercely. "If the river wants a sacrifice, it can have us both." "Kale, no, I mean it." His eyes were bright, determined. "You think I can live in a world without you? You think I want to? This isn't your burden. You are my burden." He cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle despite the chaos around them. "You're my burden and my blessing and my choice. And I choose you. I choose you over breath, over safety, over everything." Nkem's heart broke and mended in the same moment. "Love cannot be traded for fear," Kyle whispered, his forehead pressed against hers. "You taught me that." Below them, another hut collapsed into the flood. Orin's voice rose again, weaker now, pleading. "The river must be answered." Nkem pulled back slightly, her hands on Kyle's chest. She could feel his heartbeat. Strong, steady, alive. "If I'm going to die," she said quietly, "I want it to mean something. I want it to save them." "And what about saving yourself?" "Maybe that's not my story." Kale's jaw clenched. She could see him fighting it, fighting the logic, the sacrifice, the terrible mathematics of love and death. "There has to be another way," he said desperately. "There isn't. You know there isn't." The tree groaned. The water was at the lower branches now. Nkem took his face in her hands, memorizing him. The sharp line of his jaw, the warmth in his eyes, the way he looked at her like she was the whole world. "Promise me something," she whispered. Anything. Live, build your house, have children. Tell them about the girl who was promised to the river. Tell them she wasn't brave. Tell them she was terrified, but tell them she loved someone enough to let him go." "Nkem," she kissed him. Soft, final, full of everything they would never have. And then she let go of the branch. But Kyle was faster. Before she could fall, before gravity could claim her, he grabbed her arm and pulled her back. And then he jumped. True love is proven not in comfort, but in sacrifice. And sometimes the one who loves most chooses the offering themselves. Time stopped. Inkem's scream tore through the night, raw, animal, disbelieving. No! But Kyle was already in the water. The river swallowed him instantly. One moment he was falling, his eyes locked on hers, his face calm, resolved. And the next he was gone, pulled under by the current as if the Umuoma had been waiting for exactly this. The water surged once, violently, and then stopped. The roaring ceased. The rushing halted. The flood froze mid-surge, as if someone had commanded it to stillness. Nkem clung to the branch, her whole body shaking, her throat raw from screaming. Below her, the water, so violent a moment before, had gone utterly, impossibly calm. Flat as glass, dark as the space between stars. Silence fell over Amailu like a shroud. The wind died. The thunder ceased. Even the crying stopped, as every surviving soul held their breath, watching, waiting. Nkem stared at the water where Kyle had disappeared. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no, please." Nothing moved. The river did not ripple, did not surge. It simply waited, smooth and depthless. Eorin's voice rose from somewhere in the darkness, awed and trembling. "The river has taken its sacrifice." "He wasn't yours to take." Nkem's voice cracked like breaking stone. She started climbing down the tree, frantic, desperate. "He wasn't part of the covenant. He wasn't marked. Give him back." She hit the water before anyone could stop her. It was cold, so cold it drove the air from her lungs. She dove under, her eyes open in the darkness, searching, reaching, screaming his name into the water even though sound didn't carry. But there was nothing, no body, no current, just endless black depth. She surfaced, gasping, and dove again, and again, and again. Arms pulled her back, strong arms, many arms. The surviving villagers had waded out into the shallows, pulling her toward the shore even as she fought them. "Let me go! Let me go!" "Kale, he's gone, child," someone said, a woman's voice thick with sorrow. "No, no, he's not. He can't be. He can't." But even as she said it, she knew. The water had stopped rising the moment Kale entered it. The storm had ceased the instant he disappeared. The river had accepted him. Sanara found her daughter at dawn. Nkem sat on the muddy bank, soaked and shivering, her arms wrapped around her knees. The water had receded overnight, leaving Amailu battered but standing. Huts were damaged, belongings were scattered, but the people, most of them, had survived. The river had returned to its banks, calm and gentle, as if nothing had happened. Sanara knelt beside her daughter and pulled her close. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, Nkem's voice came, small and broken. "He took my place." "I know. He wasn't supposed to. It was supposed to be me." "I know, my child. Why?" The word was a sob. "Why did he do it?" Sanara stroked her daughter's wet hair, her own tears falling silent. "Because love doesn't calculate. It doesn't weigh one life against another. It simply gives." Nkem pressed her face into her mother's shoulder and wept. She wept for Kale, for the life they would never have, for the house he would never build, for the man who had loved her enough to die in her place. And somewhere deep beneath the Umuoma's current, the river, ancient and patient, and perhaps not as cruel as anyone thought, held the sacrifice gently in its depths. For 3 days, Nkem did not speak. She sat by the riverbank from dawn until dark, staring into the water, waiting for something, anything, that would tell her Kyle was more than gone. The village rebuilt around her. Huts were repaired, nets were mended. The wells, mysteriously, began to flow again. Children returned to playing in the shallows, though they gave Nkem a wide berth, their laughter quieter than before. Orin came to her on the 3rd day. He stood at a distance, leaning on his staff, his face lined with something that might have been regret. "The covenant is fulfilled," he said quietly. The river is appeased. Our people are safe. Nkem did not look at him. A life was offered, Orin continued. The balance is restored. He didn't owe the river anything, Nkem said, her voice hoarse from disuse. I was the one marked. I was the one who should have, and yet he chose, Orin interrupted gently. That is not something we can undo. I don't want it undone. I want him back. The elder sighed. Some sacrifices cannot be returned. Our child. Then what was the point? She finally looked at him, her eyes red and hollow. What was the point of any of it? The marking, the prophecy? 16 years of being told I belong to the river, only for it to take someone else? Orin had no answer. For the first time in his long life, the certainty that had always guided him felt like ash. He left her by the water. That night, Nkem stayed later than usual. The moon rose full and bright, painting the river silver. The air was soft, warm, smelling of earth and growing things. Somewhere in the distance, drums were playing, the village celebrating their survival, their deliverance. Nkem sat with her feet in the water, her arms wrapped around her knees. I hate you, she whispered to the river. I hate you for taking him, for taking the only person who ever saw me as something other than yours. The water lapped gently at her ankles. If you wanted a life, you should have taken mine. I was ready. I was willing. He shouldn't have. Her voice broke, and then she heard it. Faint, distant, like a voice carried on water. Nkem. Her head snapped up. The river was still. The village behind her was quiet except for the drums. But she had heard it. She was certain. Kale? She whispered. The water began to glow, soft at first, just a shimmer beneath the surface, like moonlight on scales. But it grew brighter, warmer, spreading outward from the center of the river in rippling waves of light. Nkem stood slowly, her heart hammering. The light rose. It came up from the depths in a column of gold and blue and silver, not harsh but gentle, and like dawn breaking under water. It moved toward her, taking shape as it rose, becoming something almost human. No, not almost. Kale stepped out of the light. He was soaked, his clothes clinging to him, water streaming from his hair. But he was breathing. His eyes were open. His chest rose and fell. He was alive. Nkem couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Kyle! Her voice was barely a whisper. He smiled, that same small, tentative smile he had given her the first morning by the river. Hello, Nkem. She ran. She hit him hard enough to nearly knock them both into the water, her arms wrapping around him, her face pressed into his chest. He was solid, real, warm. You're alive, she gasped. You're alive, you're alive, you're... I'm here, he said softly, his arms tightening around her. I'm here. But how? The river took you. I saw... I know. He pulled back just enough to look at her, his hands cupping her face. I drowned, Nkem. I felt it. I felt the water fill my lungs, felt everything go dark. Then how... The river spoke to me. Nkem went still. Kale's eyes were distant, remembering. I heard a voice, old, endless. It said love had fulfilled what fear never could. Tears spilled down Nkem's cheeks. It said the covenant was never about death, Kale continued quietly. It was about remembering, about honoring what gives life. The people had forgotten the river, taken it for granted, used it without gratitude. The prophecy was meant to remind them, to teach them that some things are sacred. But you died. I was willing to die, Kyle corrected gently. I didn't hesitate. I didn't demand anything in return. I just loved you. Completely. And the river... He shook his head, awed. The river said that was enough. Nkem's legs gave out. Kyle caught her, lowering them both to the bank, holding her as she wept. Not from grief this time, but from relief so profound it felt like breaking open. You're really here, she whispered into his chest. "I'm really here." The light in the water began to fade, sinking back into the depths. But before it disappeared entirely, Nkem felt something, a presence, vast and ancient and not unkind. The Umuoma had taken what was offered, and in its mercy had given it back. Where love chooses sacrifice without hesitation, heaven itself may pause and reconsider the terms of the covenant. The news spread through Amailu like wildfire. By dawn, the entire village had gathered at the riverbank. They came slowly, uncertainly, mothers carrying infants, the elders leaning on walking sticks, fishermen with their nets forgotten in their hands. They came to see the impossible. Kyle and Nkem stood together by the water, his arm around her shoulders, her hand clasped in his. The mark on her wrist, the swirl that had defined her entire life, was gone. The skin was smooth, unblemished, as if it had never been there at all. Orin approached, his face unreadable. For a long moment, he simply stared at them. Then, slowly, carefully, he lowered himself to his knees. "The river has spoken," he said, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd, "and we have heard." The other elders followed his lead, kneeling in the mud. "For generations," Orin continued, "we believed the covenant required a life. We believed the river demanded death, but we were wrong." He looked up at Nkem and Kale. The river never wanted death. It wanted remembrance. It wanted honor. It wanted us to understand that what gives us life, the water, the fish, the very earth beneath our feet, is sacred. And that love, he paused, his throat working. Love that gives freely, without fear, without condition, that is the truest offering of all. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A child stepped forward, a little girl no more than 6, her eyes wide with wonder. "Does that mean no more sacrifices?" Orin's weathered face softened. "No more sacrifices, little one. The covenant is fulfilled. The river is at peace with our people, but we must never forget what we have learned. We must honor the Umuoma. Give thanks for what it provides. Treat it as sacred, always." The girl nodded solemnly, then ran back to her mother. Isanara pushed through the crowd and pulled her daughter into her arms. She didn't speak, couldn't speak, but Nkem felt her mother's tears against her neck, felt the shaking relief in her embrace. "You're free," Sanara whispered finally. "My daughter, you're finally free." In the weeks that followed, Amailu began to change. The people built a new shrine by the river, not a place of fear, but a place of gratitude. Every week, they brought offerings of flowers and fruit, sang songs of thanks, taught their children to respect the water that sustained them. The fishermen never took more than they needed. The women washed their clothes gently, with prayers of appreciation. The children learned the old stories, not of vengeance and sacrifice, but of balance and respect. And Kale kept his promise. He built a house. It took him 6 months, working from dawn until dark, his hands rough and bleeding from the labor. But when it was finished, it was beautiful. Thick walls, a strong roof, windows that faced the river. On the day he carried Nkem across the threshold, the entire village celebrated. There was dancing, singing, drums that echoed across the water. Old women blessed them, children scattered flowers at their feet. And Orin, who had once proclaimed Nkem belonged to the river, stood before them and spoke the marriage rites with tears in his ancient eyes. That night, as they lay together in their new home, Kyle traced the place where the mark had been. "Do you miss it?" he asked quietly. Nkem thought about it. The mark had defined her for 16 years. It had isolated her, marked her, set her apart. But it had also led her here, to this man, to this life, and to this impossible, precious freedom. "No," she said finally, "I don't miss it." "What do you think it meant, in the end?" She rolled onto her side to face him, her hand over his heart. "I think it meant I was chosen, not for death, for love, for teaching the village what they'd forgotten, for showing them that some covenants are fulfilled not by taking, but by giving. Kale smiled and kissed her forehead. The river knew what it was doing. The river always knows. Outside, the Umuoma flowed gently past their home, its current steady and calm. And if sometimes in the deep of night Nkem thought she heard a voice in the water, ancient and patient and satisfied, she didn't fear it. She simply whispered, "Thank you," and the river, eternal and knowing, whispered back. Years later, and when Nkem's own daughter asked about the scar on her mother's wrist that wasn't there, Nkem would tell her the truth. "Once the river claimed me, and love set me free. Remember this, my child, the greatest sacrifices are not those demanded by fear, but those offered by love. And sometimes, when love is pure enough, even the river itself will bow to its power." The village of Amailu never forgot. The wells never ran dry again. The fish returned in abundance. And every year, on the anniversary of the night Kale walked out of the water, the people gathered by the Umuoma and sang. Not songs of fear, but songs of gratitude. For the river had taught them the greatest lesson of all. That which we honor honors us in return. That which we love cannot be lost. And that mercy, like water, flows deepest when given the chance.